Hey, you. Yeah, you, sitting there with your headphones on. Ever felt that prickle on the back of your neck? That sudden chill that has nothing to do with the temperature? Tonight, I'm going to share something. Something that still makes the hairs on my arms stand up just thinking about it. It's not a story I read or a movie I watched. This happened to people I knew. My neighbors, a couple, just like any other, except they had this fascination, an obsession really, with the places we all try to forget. Abandoned buildings, forgotten streets, and deserted towns. They chased the whispers, the rumors of what lingered in the silence. And they collected stories, horrifying stories. Tonight I'm going to share 3 of them with you, and trust me, you won't want to listen alone. Their first tale. It started with a whisper, a local legend that clung to the shadows of upstate New York. An old villa. Grand once, no doubt, but now just a skeletal silhouette against the night sky. People said it lived at night. That's what drew them in, Sarah and Ben. They were the kind of people who scoffed at ghost stories, who needed to see it to believe it. So naturally, when they heard about a villa that supposedly came alive after dark, they packed their gear, their cameras, their oh-so-practical skepticism, and drove out there. I remember Ben telling me about that night. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The villa loomed before them, a gothic monstrosity against a starless sky. Every window was a black eye socket staring into their souls. They climbed over the rusted gates, the silence pressing in on them like a physical weight. Inside, dust lay thick as a shroud. Cobwebs draped every corner like macabre decorations. It was the kind of place that whispered of forgotten lives, of laughter turned to dust. They explored room after room, their flashlights cutting cones through the oppressive darkness. Nothing. Just decay. Just silence. Ben was starting to think it was a bust, another tall tale. Sarah, though, she had this feeling, a knot of unease in her stomach that wouldn't go away. Then it started. Subtle at first, a faint creaking from upstairs. They froze, their breath catching in their throats. Ben dismissed it as the wind, the old house settling. But then, a whisper. Faint, like someone was right behind them, but when they whirled around, there was nothing but shadows. They moved slowly, cautiously towards the staircase, the wood groaning under their weight like an old man in pain. The air grew colder as they climbed. The creaking intensified, morphing into something rhythmic, like footsteps, heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth in the room above. Ben's hand tightened on his flashlight. He could see Sarah's face in the beam, pale and etched with a growing fear that mirrored his own. They reached the landing, the oppressive silence broken only by those relentless footsteps. They stood before a closed door, the wood warped and scarred with time. And then, a sound that Ben said he would never, ever forget. A low, guttural moan. It vibrated through the wood, through their very bones. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal, it was something else. The doorknob began to turn slowly, deliberately. Their hearts hammered against their ribs. They didn't wait to see what was behind that door. They ran. They scrambled down the stairs, their fear lending them a speed they didn't know they possessed. They didn't stop running until they were back in their car, the engine roaring to life like a desperate scream. They never went back to that villa. And to this day, Ben swears he sometimes hears those heavy footsteps in his dreams. But that was just the beginning. Their explorations took them to darker corners, to places where the veil between worlds seemed thin. Their second story. It unfolded in the cold, unforgiving streets of Brooklyn. Not the trendy parts you see in magazines. This was a street forgotten by time, lined with boarded-up brownstones and the ghosts of businesses long gone. People whispered about it, said it was haunted, not by a specific spirit but by a feeling, a palpable sense of dread that clung to the air like smog. One night, drawn by these grim tales, Sarah and Ben found themselves on that street. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. And then they saw him. An old man sitting on the steps of a dilapidated building, shrouded in shadow. He didn't seem threatening, just lonely, lost. Curiosity, That relentless companion of theirs, pulled them closer. They asked if he was all right. He just looked up. His eyes, Ben couldn't quite describe them. Ancient, deep, filled with a sorrow that seemed to stretch back centuries. He spoke in a low, raspy voice, inviting them in. Just for a while, he said, just to talk. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong, but there was a strange compulsion, a hypnotic pull in the old man's gaze. They found themselves stepping into the darkness of the building. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and decay, but also something else, something sickly sweet and cloying. The old man led them through the gloom, his footsteps barely making a sound. He told them stories, sad stories, stories of loss and despair, of lives that had withered and died within those walls. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the building seemed to change. The shadows deepened, taking on vague, unsettling shapes. Sarah felt a coldness seep into her bones that had nothing to do with the temperature. Ben noticed something even more disturbing. They were the only ones talking. The old man's lips moved, but no sound seemed to come out. Yet they understood him. It was like his words were being planted directly into their minds. Panic began to claw at the edges of their composure. They tried to leave, but the old man stood in their way, his eyes now gleaming with a strange, unsettling light. He didn't raise his voice, didn't touch them, but they felt trapped, paralyzed by an unseen force. Ben remembers a feeling of being pulled under, of his thoughts becoming tangled and confused. He saw Sarah's face contorted in silent terror. Somehow, they managed to break free. Ben doesn't remember exactly how. It was a blur of fear and adrenaline. They stumbled out of the building and ran, not stopping until they were miles away. The image of the old man's eyes burned into their minds. They later learned the stories about that street weren't just whispers. People had gone missing there, vanished without a trace. Others had emerged, changed, mute, their eyes vacant. Sarah and Ben never understood what that old man was or what he wanted, but they knew they had brushed against something ancient and malevolent that night, and they were lucky to have escaped with their sanity. Their final journey, this one changed them. It silenced their adventurous spirits, leaving them quiet and withdrawn. They ventured into a place that wasn't just a haunted building or a cursed street. It was an entire deserted village. Deep in the arid heartland, a place time seemed to have forgotten. The maps barely showed it, and the locals spoke of it in hushed tones, if at all. They called it the Silent Village. What drew Sarah and Ben there was the sheer scale of it. An entire community, gone, vanished. No signs of struggle, no natural disaster, just empty houses, abandoned tools, meals left half-eaten on tables. It was as if life had simply stopped. They walked through the dusty streets, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the empty window frames. It was a silence heavier than any they had ever encountered, a silence that felt aware. As they explored the deserted homes, an unsettling feeling began to creep over them. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like being watched, an intense, unseen presence that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the village. They found children's toys scattered on the floor, clothes still hanging in wardrobes, as if the inhabitants were expected to return any minute. But the dust that coated everything told a different story. A story of years, decades, of abandonment. Then came the whispers, faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves. But as they ventured deeper into the village, they grew clearer. Voices, murmuring just beyond the edge of hearing. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone. It was filled with a deep, pervasive sadness, a collective sorrow that seemed to cling to the very air. The feeling of being watched intensified. They started seeing things out of the corner of their eyes, flickering shadows in empty doorways, figures moving in the periphery. Every creak of a door, every rustle of wind sent shivers down their spines. But it wasn't just what they saw or heard, it was what they felt. A crushing weight of despair, a sense of profound loss that seemed to seep into their very souls. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted landscape, they stumbled upon the village square. In the center stood a well. As they approached it, they heard it, a sound that made their blood run cold. Weeping, soft, heart-wrenching sobs that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth itself. They peered into the well, but saw only darkness. The weeping continued, a chorus of unseen sorrow that echoed the emptiness of the village. That was it. Something broke within them that night. The sheer weight of the village's despair, the unseen presence, the mournful weeping. It was too much. They didn't run this time. They retreated slowly, silently, their faces pale and drawn. They left the silent village behind, but they never truly escaped it. When they returned home, they were different. The spark in their eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet unease. They stopped talking about their adventures. The thrill was gone, replaced by a haunting silence that mirrored the one they had found in that deserted village. They never went exploring again. Whatever they had witnessed, whatever they had felt in those 3 places, it had changed them in a way that words couldn't describe. I told you these stories because they're true. They happened to people I knew, and sometimes late at night when the wind howls outside my window, I can almost hear those footsteps in the old villa, the distorted whispers from that Brooklyn street, and the sorrowful weeping from that silent village. It makes me wonder, what exactly did they encounter in those forgotten places? And more importantly, what did those places encounter in them? Some stories are too eerie to be forgotten. If you've seen something, felt something, that refuses to fade, send it to us. We'll breathe life into the shadows you left behind.